hello. And I would say hello, Rumblers. But actually, this is my first attempt. I've been fooling around today. It's my first attempt at YouTube. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But hey, and I am very honored tonight. Oh, and I worked on Twitter too. So I don't know. I'm trying to be more, I'm trying to respond. People are saying, how do you promote your new book? Prepare. And I'm like, get on Twitter, do this, get on YouTube. And so I'm like trying to do things to widen my scope. But I am so honored tonight. And you know why I'm honored? Because, not because of my ringing and my wife and everything. It's because, guess who we have with us tonight? The amazing Joe.
Thank you.
Joe of Good Lawgic is here with me in my little world here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my privilege.
It's an honor. And, and I would say that, you're such a, I really, we had some streams together and we did some stuff together and really enjoyed the chemistry we had. I really enjoyed your input and your perspective on things. And so I wanted to invite you on to kind of just talk about you a little bit because you have an interesting background, an interesting perspective. So just so people don't, who doesn't know Joe? But go ahead, Joe. Go ahead and say what you want to say so that you can promote yourself and do what you want before we get into all that stuff.
I mean, I'm Joe Newman. I have a channel called Good Lawgic, and I talk 6 nights a week. I do a show 4 nights a week. It's called The Following Program. The other 2 nights it's called Viewers Discretion, which I thought were that's probably the concept of those behind those names was probably the most ingenious idea I've ever had in my life. And it's downhill from here. So.
It's all downhill. Well, I thank you very much. And let's just make sure we're good. So, well, let's see. Rumblers. Good evening. Can you see?
Let me see what's going on here.
Yeah, I see it's live on Rumble, but not on. It's live on YouTube, but not on Rumble.
Is that really true?
Yeah. Let me check. Make sure. Let's get all set. Hey, are you guys seeing me? So how do we fix this?
Don't know.
Let's see.
Rumble has been a disaster for me. I'm not going to kid you.
Let's see. Let's see if we can fix this first before we no.
Yeah, before we go any further.
Yeah, before we go further, because we want to make sure we get our friends recording hotkeys guests. No. End broccoli. Let's see here. We're live. Remove. Edit. Good Lawgic. Unplugged. I don't want to be YouTube only. Let's see. Banners, brand. Hit the like button. All right, let's see. We got technical difficulties, having issues. Yes, I want to.
I had a problem with Rumble yesterday when I was like trying. They were having all sorts of issues when I was trying to send my feed into Rumble.
Yes.
Like it was really giving me an issue yesterday.
Okay, Valhalla's in my YouTube chat. How do we add a stream?
So up in the upper top, you know how you normally would stream to Rumble, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you have to put the whole RTMP thing in there.
Yes,
and everything.
I got that.
Okay, so if you look at StreamYard, you can add in the middle a Rumble thing, and you can add whatever the code and whatever the codes are. There are 2 codes. So whatever those codes are, you can add that. Where you have that little thing that's shaped like this with a ball on each end, for your destinations.
Wait, where is the destinations? I don't see that.
Right over where it says private chat and comments.
Private chat and comments. Yeah.
So right above that,
yeah,
you'll see like a little YouTube logo, and you might see a Rumble logo, you might not, but basically you see like a little share thing. The share button should look like a sideways V with like little balls. How do I? I'll tell you. Let me watch my call. Okay, here. Let me do this.
Edit.
Yeah, edit.
Okay, edit. Now, how do I add a destination? Add a new destination.
There you go.
Custom RTP. Okay, I see it. All right, let's see if we can get them over here. I thought I already did this, but
Yeah, no. Like I said, Rumble. I did this yesterday, and Rumble wasn't working.
All right. Well, I'm going to try you because I love my Rumblers.
Yeah.
So I got to get them on board. Hold
Your
on.
Rumblers are like your bread and butter.
I know. Come on. That's where all my peoples are. All right. Hold on. Here we go. We're going to try it again. Paste that. They really should make it easier on StreamYard, don't you think?
I think it's that Rumble doesn't interface directly. Like the other stuff you can preset. Like YouTube, you'll never have to put it in again. It just goes straight to your YouTube channel. Same thing with Facebook and like a bunch of other places. But Rumble, I think there's an anti-Rumble bias from StreamYard.
Yeah, maybe.
Or it's also the fact that Rumble has a new link every day. Every time you have a new stream, you have a new link, which is stupid.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Let's see if our Rumblers are on board, because we got to get our Rumblers on board. Okay. Let's see. Hey. All right. Let's see. It's still not working. This is not good. Okay. One more shot. Oh, wait. It says it's on.
If we have to start all over again, we could do that.
Oh no, it says.
Oh wait, it's going now. I think.
Okay. Are my Rumblers here?
It's going now.
Okay, it is. Okay, good.
I don't know how that worked.
I'm just happy. Or my Rumbler. Okay, we can see I persisted. He persisted. Okay, so Rumblers, you are on board. Let's start over. Hey, Joe.
Hey.
This is such a professional operation here.
Yeah, there you go.
So yes, so welcome. We were on time, but I will say that I am actually streaming on YouTube additionally to Rumble. And I did that because I'm working on Twitter, and I'm trying to do things because I really want to promote Prepare and widen my audience for Prepare. Nice. So this is the point. So anyways, Joe, would you introduce yourself to the communities of Rumble and YouTube?
Yeah, my name is Joe Neerman. People call me Good Lawgic. That's the name of my channel on Rumble, on YouTube, on Locals especially. Locals is really big. And I do a nightly live stream, and I like to focus on law and politics, and I'm probably in this sphere, I'm probably most unique in that I like looking at the psychological and the mindset of a society, a culture, or individual, like what makes people tick. Mm-hmm. So like when I'm sitting there and I'm looking at a trial, so I'm trying to look at like what the law is, and then I'm trying to look at, okay, what really works based on how a typical juror is likely to think, and who's your audience, and who are you really pitching to, and is this resonating with your audience, or is this only resonating with you, and you're not really meeting the audience that's outside of your typical echo chamber, because each of us fall into our own echo chamber. So, and how to sort of figure out how to cross that chasm or chasm whenever possible. So, and I get very, especially on Locals, I try to fixate a lot on what motivates us to act the way we act, because that's something that's been a passion of mine since I'm a teenager. So,
well, let's talk about it, because that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, because we always cover these law trials, and there's going to be trials upcoming that we'll cover, I'm sure, and we've done them in the past. But your background, everybody's a unique individual and comes from a unique background. I'd like to know a little bit, like, where did you grow up, and what was your upbringing like? And I know that you're Orthodox, right? So how did that impact you? Were you raised that way? And
yes.
Give us some insight about like early Joe.
Early Joe. All right. Well, one brother, one sister, very stable family. Like, as far as like my parents, my mom and dad looked at each other like they were best friends. I always felt like I was very different from everyone in my family, in the sense that I questioned things more than anyone else. Not in an anti-religious so to speak, but like I would ask like pesky kind of questions. I was raised in what we in our circles call FFB, which stands for from birth. So from is a term that Orthodox Jews use to refer to someone else who they recognize as being another Orthodox Jew, as opposed. So that the term in Yiddish that we use is for that is from, and some people become from when they get older, and others are born into it, and those are referred to as FFBs, like from
Okay,
birth.
that's funny. Well, we
So
call that like cradle Catholics. Similar
there you
idea.
go. Okay, yeah, that's the same
Okay.
thing. So yeah, so my earliest, strongest memories are actually of probably religious observance of various holidays. It's very very impactful. One of the things that I can remember when I was 3 years old, like a Passover Seder in my grandmother's house, like and and they were always, it was always myself and my immediate family, my first cousins. We lived around the corner from my grandmother,
And this
and
was in what part of New York?
this was in Flushing,
Okay.
an area called Hillcrest.
All right.
So, which my father still lives in the same house that I grew up in, although he's remodeled it so it looks nothing like what it looked like when I was growing up. But yeah, so those are my and I went to yeshiva from the time I was 3 years old until all the way through high school, and then even post high school while I was in college. I was studying in yeshiva. I went to Israel for a year, and to me, the secular studies, which is basically what everyone learns in public school, that's always considered secondary to like your Judaic studies. Like we spend all morning studying. From the time you're in fifth grade, you start learning Gemara, which people call
And that's called yeshiva,
yeshiva. Yeah,
right?
yeshiva
Which is
is
actually the Orthodox Jewish school. Now, is that in addition? Is that your total school? That's like everything you do, right?
that's everything.
Everything.
That's everything. And the way those are structured is in the morning. So we'll start school like 7:30 in the morning and have prayers. And which morning we pray 3 times a day. Morning prayers are the longest prayers. So that usually takes on a typical day a minimum of like 40 minutes. And on certain days, depending on the day of the week or the time of the year, it could be up to, on Shabbos, it ends up being for like 2 hours. But so, and then you have breakfast, and then you go right into your Judaic studies, which are primarily learning Gemara, what you guys would call Talmud, from the time you start fifth grade. You don't start Talmud till you're in fifth grade or so.
But now you're reading it actually in Hebrew, right?
Yeah, we learn Hebrew the same time we're learning English, maybe right afterwards. Right. So we're learning Hebrew from the time I'm learning Jewish customs and traditions from before I can speak. When you're an FFB. There's certain Hebrew terms which are used every day in a Jewish home, which you can't which are like just foundational, and they're words that a 2-year-old would know, because
there's words that are what? I'm sorry.
These are words that a 2-year-old would know. For example, whenever we eat anything or drink anything, we're going to make a blessing on it before we eat. That in Hebrew is called a bracha. Okay, it's the same thing. Like, by the way, we'll say, like, if you're wishing someone well, and you would give him a bracha. So this bracha is like a blessing to God, and there's certain preset brachos that are made depending on the nature of the food that you're eating, and these brachos are something. The word bracha is something every 2-year-old kid knows. Mm-hmm. And how to make a bracha is something that every 3-year-old knows. They're learning from the time you're 3 years old.
And I will say, this is why I love talking to somebody who's comes from a very different background, mm-hmm. but yet the commonality, the strength of the faith is so important. And I think that from speaking from a Christian world, we've really failed a lot in passing on our faith to our children as sort of a wider society. And in fact, one of the interesting insights I had from writing Prepare is that I discovered, I will say, maybe for myself, and maybe it's obvious to everybody else, but I discovered that faith is essential to human freedom, which is an odd thing to say. But when I was writing my 2 chapters on faith, because the chapter, it is a book, coming from a position of faith. It's not overwhelming. It's 2 chapters within the book. And but when I wrote that, I'm like, okay, I want to describe what I believe and what my faith is and all this. But then as I thought about it, the problem is that people have faith. Where it is placed is a question.
Right.
And we live in a world of idolatry. The first commandment has been violated left, right, and upside down all across our culture. And people have placed their faith in vessels that is not worthy of that placement. And it diminishes us as humanity. And I think the first commandment needs to be really looked at hard. And one of the questions I said is, where are you placing your faith? And is it worthy of the placement of that faith?
Well, we all worship something. I mean, you either worship God, you worship money, you can worship, and some people would say that the left worships science. I don't think they really.
No,
I
they
don't.
do
I don't
not.
think.
They
I don't think
worship
they really do.
power.
They worship, right? That, yeah. Or so man either worships God or ultimately ends up worshiping himself. That's what ends up happening, and worshiping yourself is never a way to that you're actually really happy, because nobody knows how stinky you are at life and at the world and as a person more than you know about yourself. We all look at ourselves. We all, on some level or another, recognize we know our own foibles. We know that whatever level other people, even especially if people treat you with respect, everyone sort of feels like, I don't really deserve that. Like I'm not anything special. So, like, in a sense, it's an interesting dichotomy. This is one of the reasons when you have relationships between men and women, one of the reasons that women run away from a man who chases her too overtly is because she has her own insecurities, and she sort of feels like, look, I know I suck, and if you're sitting here worshiping me, how much must you suck? You must be terrible. You're even worse than me. So it's like, on some level, that's why it becomes like a bit of a turnoff when someone is chasing you, because you recognize we all think of ourselves as being somewhat inferior, and someone who's treating themselves as if they're less than us and chasing after us. It's like, I mean, we all think it's like, it's not fun, it's not entertaining, there's no game, there's no feeling of conquering, and that could be part of it. But it's also, I think, on some level that we look down on them with disdain, because we know because of our own lack of self-respect. So we tend to say that if they are worshiping me, they must be even much, much worse than I am. So.
Well, it's you, but you're and we brought up this from your upbringing in the yeshiva and in an Orthodox community.
Yeah, they don't teach any yeshiva.
It's shining a light really on the failings of our society across the board to pass on the faith. And and you're speaking from a Jewish faith, and I'm speaking from a Christian faith. We really have failed in that, and I think people have been shut down by secular society, by certain kind of simplistic ideas of, well, maximum freedom, and I'm going to let my child choose for himself, and also the idea that separation of church and state, that we've got to keep. And these ideas have come into parents' heads, when in fact a parent's primary responsibility, I think, is to pass on the faith. And it's a valuable, and what happens is, because we have failed to do that, that vessel of faith has been filled by this secular wokeism, and we've really gotten off track. It's quite a frightening thing, because wokeism is a religious movement, a secular religious movement. It's not a rational. It's completely irrational, but faith is irrational. So to say it's irrational is just to say it is a matter of faith. And when you define the values that are endemic in the woke movement, it really runs contrary to the Judeo-Christian heritage that's created the freedom of our country.
Yeah, I always look at Jews who support the left, and I look at them as being so immensely backward. Now, irreligious Jews, that makes sense, because they have a certain self-resentment and hatred towards, and resentment toward God and themselves. But I think not all of them, but that's a guiding motivation for the overwhelming majority of them. I wanted, when you were talking about like a duty to teach faith, you can phrase it that way, or you can even look at it as, okay, so I think that when you're raised in a religious home, and this is probably the same whether it's a Christian or a Jewish home, I can only speak from my own personal experiences. So you have certain things that you are taught to do, that you do without much thought or critical analysis, because of the fact that this is comfortable for you to do it, and it's something you were trained, like a monkey is trained that, hey, if I'm trained that I make a bracha every time I eat food, so I'm going to do that. If I'm a little kid and I'm getting enthusiastic encouragement from my parents when I'm studying Torah and I'm doing well at it, I'm going to keep doing that. Not necessarily because I've thought it through and have a deep belief in God or in what I'm doing, but it becomes like this is a system that makes me happy because everyone treats me so nicely and so well as long as I'm down with the system. There's a certain point in time, usually in one's late teens, when I think they start assessing and questioning, do I really believe everything I've been doing my entire life or not? And that's sort of a crossroads, which I think everyone comes to at some point on some level, where they're sort of self-assessing. Do I really believe in this or do I not? But
let me leverage that a little bit, because
okay.
and this is something, again, writing this book was really the 2 chapters on faith were a blessing to me, because it really, I mean, how many people have really had to write down some of their faith insights? I mean, it's quite a it was quite a challenge. I didn't think I was going to be up to it, I must say, but I'm very happy with the way it came out. It's, it's limited and humble. It's my humble contribution.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that you just said, which is, if we love our children, we want them to be free.
Right.
And that, and the idea here is it's freedom from tyrannies external, but also internal.
Well, when you say free, do you mean free or you really mean happy ultimately?
Well, but happiness is an exterior. I don't think happiness is the objective. I think the objective is fulfillment.
Okay.
And happiness is a subset of fulfillment. And in order to be fulfilled, your life has to be properly aligned in faith. And what I was going to say to you is that you were grounded in your faith, and then you questioned and you analyzed and said, do I believe? And I think that many of the people on the woke left, and many of the people who are secular Christians or people who are maybe secular Jews, maybe they don't really even understand their faith. Because I think the first thing is, do you really know what you're criticizing? I found that the more I get into my Catholicism, the deeper it becomes. And I'm just so impressed by the 2,000 years, in your case, 4,000 or 5,000 years, of the amount.
It's 3,300. It's like I actually did the math on this like recently. It's actually this year. This Passover is going to be 3,335.
Well, salute. Yeah, I know it's one of the oldest monotheistic religions on
first
earth.
monotheistic religion. Yeah.
And I will say that, but do we really, before you criticize, get to know what you're criticizing? Because oftentimes what people are doing is they project their own inner demons onto, and I mean, the Jews they've been suffering from that for many times. People project everything that they think onto this minority group, but people do that with Christians too. They project onto Christians, oh, you're a hater. You hate gay people, for example, because look, your scripture says that gay is sinful, right? Well, but our faith also says that we're all sinners, right? And that we are all, and for me to criticize, I can point the finger. Well, I'm pointing the finger back at myself. And I think that this is where they fall down, is that the faith teaches love, not hatred. And the hatred is coming from their own heart, and they're projecting that onto what they think the faith is rather than what it actually is. So my point is,
that I agree with. Yeah.
So my point is that I think a good study grounding in the faith in your early years is helpful, so that when you get to the point of questioning, you at least know what you're questioning.
Well, it's also, there's that, and there's also, it's giving you a framework for ethics. And ultimately, everyone creates their own system of ethics. And one of the advantages to coming from a religious home of any of the Abrahamic faiths, and this applies to Islam also, is it sort of gives you a foundational type of right and wrong delineation. And if you feel like you're doing something, and that's helpful, because you need to, even though it sounds like it's imprisoning, you can only feel genuine happiness and contentment if you feel that you're at peace with yourself and you're not a hypocrite. Because hypocrisy ends up ripping us apart, whereas sort of I know that, like, I'm I'm saying one thing one day and then doing the opposite the next day, and that's a life of turmoil. In order to find inner peace, you sort of need to have that framework of ethics, and then adjust your actions as best as possible to work within that framework
But
in order to actually find happiness, I think.
let me drill back. Exactly. You said something so profound. I want you to talk more about it too. And that is faith drives morality and ethics.
Hmm?
And so if your faith is misplaced, your ethics and morality will be misplaced.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about the in the depth of the religion and the depth of your faith. Well, and I maybe ask me. This is an interesting question. This will be a cross faith question because as a Catholic, we have Jesus and we have Christian concepts, and I'm wondering how it echoes into Judaism because Judaism is the foundation of Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
And that is that Christ teaches that I want your whole self. I'm going to get the quote wrong, all my Christian fellows, but I want everything you have, but my burden is light. Meaning that you are Christian from head to toe, all the time, everything you are. But if you follow that path, it's actually a much easier path than if you deny him.
There's a certain feeling of liberation in that.
Right. And so this kind of goes back to what you're saying is if you have a clarity of ethics, it makes your life much easier to travel in.
Yeah, we believe, religious Jews believe that when God took us out of Egypt, it wasn't some merely a physical salvation, but that he actually was, the whole 10 plagues, and if anyone has studied the story of Exodus and that whole thing, like God could have just marched us out of there on day one. He didn't have to go through that whole exercise of ultimately getting Pharaoh to bend the knee and say go. Like he could have, if he wanted to, he could have just created a big fire around insulating the Jews and then marched them on out of there, and everything would have been. He's God. He's doing all these never before, never since seen miracles. Why not do it that way? But the point was that there was actually an acquisition of the Jews as a people, and that they were under Pharaoh's domain, and that he wanted Pharaoh specifically to relinquish that domain, but that we actually are switching from becoming slaves to Pharaoh to being servants of God, and that through that servitude, that's where you find genuine happiness. And it doesn't mean living a life which is constantly praying or things of that nature. That's not what God is looking for from us or expecting from us, but it does mean living consistently a life that's guided by ethics.
Well, see, this goes to a point. I have a discussion a lot with my friends about music. And they say, well, if it doesn't have Jesus, 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 praise God in it, then it's not, but I think that Christianity is everything that you do, and you worship God by doing the best that you can do with the gifts that you're given. And so if I listen to Bach, he wrote that beautiful play the best he could. If you're a musician and you're doing the best you can, that's God's gift. And you're celebrating God by the work that you do. And that you walk into a cathedral and you see the beautiful stained glass windows and the beautiful cathedral. This is the best we can possibly do. This is the most beautiful thing I can do. And you praise God with everything you are.
Right. And I'll tell you something. I happen to be a big believer that there's really an unlimited number of paths to God. Like we actually say that when we came out, Jacob had 12 sons, and each of those sons became a tribe. Like they had their own massive amount of offspring while in Egypt, and became a tribe unto themselves. And that the tribes each are reputed to have different attributes to them, as far as areas that they were their particular area of strength, and that the reason God did it that way instead of us all being like just sons of Jacob without there being individual tribes is sort of a message to us that there's some people might fixate on finding their happiness by focusing in this direction, and other people in a different direction, and that's one is not superior to the other.
There's so much commonality here. It's incredible. It's incredible that people, basically the Abrahamic faiths, right? And I want to address somebody asked about atheism and agnostics, but let's driving on that again. I always had a problem. I was raised Protestant, and I was in a lot of Protestant circles, and I always felt very excluded. And I was very not excluded when I went to the Catholic Church. Now, maybe this is, and I'm not speaking against all Protestants. I'm just saying that one of the things that I loved was that there was an infinite path to God. And it's not like, if you don't believe this, this, and this, you got to believe this, and you've got to believe it in my way, or you're not in my church.
Right.
As opposed to, there's an infinite ways, and this is what we understand it to be, but you've got to find your own path to God.
Right.
I found that to be much more appealing because I'm a naturally disagreeable person. And I'm not going to agree with anybody.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of echoes what you're saying.
Yeah. No, I think that is an echo. That is an echo of that. Now we start with, like, basically there's certain basic things that we all accept as being foundational that you cannot break away from, and that's essential to being considered following Jewish faith. But I think, which are referred to as, like, Maimonides basically codified them as, like, the 13 essential beliefs of Judaism, which that it's like there's no negotiating on those. It's like you accept it or you're not considered to be a practicing Jew. But yeah, after that, then yeah, I think there are really ultimately an infinite number of ways to get closer.
And one of the things,
and that I also think we have strengths. Like, God sort of hardwires each of us a little bit different, and no two people are hardwired the exact same way. And I think that's because God's not looking for robots. It's not. He could have created an army of robots to serve him if that's what he wanted. I mean, that would be much easier, much less of a pain in the neck.
So this is such a great conversation, Joe. I am so happy you're on here because you are just wonderful. Let me ask you this, because there's so many ways I want to go, but one of them, and we talked about freedom being essentially grounded in faith. Now, my question is it Judeo-Christian faith? Because as Christians, we believe that freedom is essential because God wants us to choose him. And in order to have the ability to choose him, we also have to have the ability to reject him. And so freedom is a foundational concept in Christianity. And so I think that our country is founded in this concept of freedom based on a Judeo-Christian ethic. Now, what does Judaism say about that, Ad?
Well, I would certainly agree with you that despite the fact that there seem to be a lot of people like to point to Jefferson as in question what his level of faith, and he's constantly referring to a creator, or he sort of seems to be a little bit murky as to where he stood personally with respect to his relationship with God. But there's no question that this is a Judeo-Christian, that this country is founded in Judeo-Christian principles. There's a phenomenal amount of overlap in that, which is one of the reasons when I started my channel, I was like, you know what, everything that Trump is arguing for is something that he's looking for return to Judeo-Christian type foundational values, and everything that's in there is completely consistent with my faith and what I think is a healthy way for people to genuinely achieve happiness. So that's why it was very easy for me to, like, embrace politically a MAGA type of perspective, because I was like, you know what, this is, the roots as far as how we started here. We are looking for fairness, and yet in not giving handouts, there's still accountability, there's still expectations on each person, and those expectations and challenges are not burdens. Those are actually, if you have a healthy mindset, those are blessings. Those are things. The ability to have a challenge and overcome that challenge is ultimately a blessing. It is far harder to live a happy lifestyle if you grow up in a completely sheltered, financially secure, everything is perfect and gravy for you. It's much harder to grow up happy, because we need to face challenges and overcome them to actually find our own happiness. In fact, I actually think that the phrase pursuit of happiness, rather than life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, rather than happiness itself, is because you can only actually attain happiness by pursuing it and actually having to work for it. If it's gifted to you, you're going to be miserable. You cannot. No one else can make you happy.
From the original Lockean view of property.
Was it?
Yes. So what happened was John Locke was life, liberty, and property. And our first bleeding heart, Jefferson, changed it to pursuit of happiness. But I do agree with you that it is the pursuit of happiness, and that is the pursuit of the path that is individualized. That is, it's not, and I don't really think that happiness is, I don't really agree with that. Happiness is the goal. And I think that, life is suffering, and we do have the path that we need to choose is that of fulfillment and salvation. And maybe that's for, but going back, I want to go back to the Judeo-Christian heritage. I think it's not just foundational to this country, it's foundational to Western civilization itself. And I know that Ben Shapiro talks about the bridge between Athens and Jerusalem, in that when we talk what Western civilization is, it's essentially the Judeo-Christian heritage founded in Jerusalem, combined with the Western culture that began in ancient Greece, and sort of those two concepts merging and a bridge between. So it's like the rational and the faith, and a bridge. And so if it's all rational, if it's all Athens, you lose the faith, then the bridge collapses. And similarly, if it's all faith and no rationality, the bridge collapses. So you have to have both in order for Western civilization to exist. And those are the two very things that are being actively attacked and destroyed by our left. And it's a shame, because we need a healthy left. A healthy left is the act of creative destruction that destroys corruption, that reinvigorates institutions. We need a healthy left. But what's happened is we're getting the worst out of the left, and all they're doing is destroying foundations that are positive things in society.
That's a really interesting point, because they have become agents of chaos rather than agents. And when I say agents of chaos, I mean, like, they're constantly innovating whatever new bizarre direction that we're going to go in, and saying that whatever that is, whatever direction we decide to go in, this is something that the rest of society must embrace. Otherwise, society is evil.
And it's almost that if there is an institution, that institution is a target for destruction. Mm-hmm. That any kind of organization is sought to be used as an instrument of power and ego. And again, it puts the self and humanity above God. Mm-hmm. They're trying to control law and faith so that they can turn right into wrong. And it's an idolatrous concept. Now, before we get into, I want to talk about agnosticism and atheism for a second.
But before you get to that, I just want to point out, it's not just idolatrous, it's self-destructive, and it's guaranteed to end in misery for anyone who embraces it. And this is why you never see anyone from the left, never, who seems like a genuinely happy person. It's so rare. I mean, try to name someone who seems like they're happy from the left. Every one of them seemed angry and or miserable and sad. It's just like every one of them. And it's like, and you could say to yourself, why should you feel that way? You're basically enjoying whatever freedoms that you can come up with tomorrow. Is like, all right, let's start doing that. And whatever it is, you're embracing that. You would think that would help you find your peace, but no, they find it has to lead to ultimately being miserable, and that's when we get to see it.
Right. Well, you see these, the blue-haired trans people and these activists, these women that are cutting their hair, and like with the things, and their breasts are exposed, and they're like yelling. They're the most. You can see their faces look so miserable and full of hate and anger and misery.
Yeah, and to such a degree that it's like you couldn't even fake that for like 3 minutes straight, and they genuinely are feeling it in their heart, like they're furious.
Yeah, the hatred is just so well, and this is
so palpable.
Faith, and I will say that my faith, it's a solution. It's a solution to the problem that confronts us all, which is we're internally flawed, and we have hatred in our heart, and we have jealousy, and we are flawed people. And I can go to communion and get my forgiveness and move forward with life in a positive, looking upwards into something that's positive and trying to be positive in the world. Whereas if you define yourself by sin and you're destroyed, then you define yourself, well, I'm just an evil person, and then you try to destroy the world.
Yeah.
What is before we move to agnosticism, what is the Jewish Orthodox view on wine?
On wine?
Yes.
That's such a random question.
Well, it's because I have my bottle of wine here, and I want to eat it. I want to drink it with my wine and cheese, you see. And as a good Catholic, we believe in wine.
There are a lot of laws around wine.
Okay, there's a lot of laws.
Yeah,
well, now, when does Passover begin?
Wednesday night.
Wednesday night. And so you basically don't stream or do anything during Passover. Is that correct?
So there's the first 2 days and last 2 days are considered days that, I mean, it's a little confusing how the calendar ended up becoming the way it did. If you look in the Torah, it says the first and the seventh day are holy, and that lasts for 7 days. Now, because of issues with calendar, and you have to recognize that we deal with a lunar calendar. Okay. So before there was a calendar that was established by rabbinical authorities roughly 1800 years ago. So the way that they would decide when there's a new month is basically there was a system that was orchestrated where people would come in and say they saw the new moon after the moon had basically gone away on day X. And they would say, and they know that every time a lunar calendar that it could come out, that it's basically comes out, it's like 29 and a half days is a lunar cycle. So when you're trying to figure out a lunar calendar, it gets, in some days you can't have half days. So the question is, some months are going to have 30 days and some will have only 29. And then to match up with the solar calendar, and during the course of a lunar year ends up being 354 days rather than 365 and a quarter days. So the point that I'm getting at is when you have a Jewish holiday that's supposed to be on the 15th day of the first month of the year. Mm-hmm. So now the question is, well, when did the 12th month end and the first month start? And when did that happen? And it could have been like either on Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on whether the 12th month was a 29-day month or a 30-day month. Well, there would be a whole court system that was set up where people would come in and testify that they saw the moon, and they would say, okay, we're ordaining that since they saw the moon on this day, that was only a 29-month day. The process to do that 2,000 years ago was a very convoluted process. Like now that they're deciding in one rabbinic court in Jerusalem that this month is going to be a 29-day month rather than a 30-day month, how do you convey that quickly to like people who need to observe a holiday, thousands of miles away? Well, they had a system that was set up that on mountaintops, and this was actually mirrored in Lord of the Rings. Those of you who've watched that series, where they actually, or maybe it was in Game of Thrones, I don't remember. I saw it somewhere where basically from one mountaintop to the next, they would light this massive torch, and people would see the torches, and they would see the torches lit up, and if they saw it lit up on that day, they would know, oh, okay, it's a new month, and that's how they would convey it. But at a certain point in time, certain people who were, we'll call them leftist Jews, so to speak, decided to try and mess with that and light it even when it was, and light the torches even when it didn't happen. So they had to come up with a brand new system. So what happened with Jewish holidays was they basically said, anyone, let's say you're not in the country of Israel, let's say you're in Turkey or you're in Spain or you're wherever, how are you going to find out? Well, what they decided to do with Jewish holidays is that they would have an extra day of Jewish holiday. So that's why, even though it says the first and seventh day are supposed to be like holy days, and when it says a holy days, it means we can't do work other than cooking, but which we would never do on the Sabbath. But aside from cooking, all the other work is plowing or stuff and that translates as dealing with electricity and things of that nature, that you cannot do that on the first or seventh day. If you're living outside the country of Israel, they took up the custom that because you don't want to, God forbid, end up doing work on a day that's holy, they would treat the first and second day as if it was holy. So now you end up having a first and second day. We end up having 2 days, whereas
this sounds like a very insider Jewish rant.
I'm giving you the Give me the
You're
real,
giving me some insider
give me
discussion.
the real depth that you were never expecting here. So you end up having, so now Passover goes from being 7 days to being 8 days, because like you want to have, because that 7th day, the day after, you want to make sure in case it's Passover. So
Just
that's
in
why,
case.
yeah. So what ends up happening is, even after they instituted a formalized calendar, they set a rule that even though we know when it is, we're still going to keep that custom going, even if you live outside of Israel. So that's why Israeli Jews will have only like the 1st and 7th days will be days that they recognize, and that's considered completely proper under Jewish law. Whereas we American Jews or anywhere outside of Israel, we will observe it on the 1st and 2nd and the 7th and 8th days, and the middle days, the intermediary days. So then we're allowed to do other work. So
Well,
the upshot of that is that Wednesday night and Thursday night, I'm not going to be streaming. What's that?
I want to show you though, just for the chat, they're interested in the cheese plate.
Nice.
We have grapes,
Sweet.
we have Ritz crackers, and we have 3 forms of cheese here. This is an English Stilton infused with apricot.
Tell me Gouda. Tell me you got
This is
Gouda
a
there.
Gouda, smoked
Nice.
Gouda,
Gouda's
and
great.
this is a Roquefort. And this is the
that.
thing. You ever had blue? It's like a real strong blue cheese.
Mm-hmm.
It's like penicillin in cheese.
Look at you,
and
like a Frenchman with your wine and cheese.
And when you eat this, I will tell you, you need wine. Roquefort cheese requires good white wine. So we have with this a fine German white wine, Riesling, Adolf Mueller Auslese. Can you see that? Anyway, so this is, people were asking me what it is. So yes, very fancy. This is my dinner, actually. I got so preoccupied with all kinds of other stuff I've forgotten. This is what I'm eating. But I wanted.
So that's the Jewish calendar that I just.
I wanted to change. I wanted to get over to the agnostics because.
Do it.
Well, one of the things is that I will say that I was almost agnostic at some point in my life, and I found that people that are agnostics are generally very thoughtful and ethical people, and are working very strongly and very hard towards their faith. I mean, I think that they've put a lot of thought into it now. And I had a friend who asked me about some faith and was having faith issues, I would say, and doubts. And the first thing I said, well, you've got to build your faith on a foundation of truth. Don't fake it. Don't lie into your faith. Believe what you believe. And I think that, ultimately there is a leap of faith. There's a foundational choice that you make, and it's irrational. It can't be justified. People oftentimes get so wrapped up in their rational heads that it rebels against the faith. But the faith is a whole different area of your body that needs exercise, and it's in the chest, as C.S. Lewis says. And so talk a little bit, because talk a little bit about the agnostics, the people that are, now there's the difference between people who are just militant and use that as a weapon against religion. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are struggling with their faith as a matter of just being honest with themselves.
Well, I mean, I think it depends a lot on the individual who you're addressing. Like some of them, like if you're not someone who's observing a life of faith, so then transitioning to that seems like a very overwhelming burden to embrace, because all of a sudden now, you're being judged by someone. Your actions are being judged, even when you're in the privacy of your own room, and it feels very taxing, and it feels as if Big Brother, but in this sense, Big God is watching you, and things that you might have taken for granted that you would have like taken liberties on, all of a sudden you feel as if like, I don't want to have to sit here and deal with that. And I think I think for some of them, I think there's a cognitive dissonance where it's much easier to reject the existence of God than it is to embrace it. So any possible basis to sort of to give them a branch to grip onto, to reject the existence of God is to them a salvation, because they feel like this way I'm never going to be held accountable for whatever wrongs I may have committed in my life. And that's to them, they feel like protected. They're like, hey, I'm not going to have to answer for that time that I beat someone up. I'm not going to have to answer.
Do you think it's that, or do you think it's that? I don't know. I don't agree with that. I think it's more of a. I think people you know, the true agnostic, okay, the person who is struggling with faith, I think the first thing they say is that they don't believe it because they don't believe it's true, because their rational mind cannot accept the existence of God or a higher reality than is the physical reality, that we are chemical machines and that it's a physical universe and that God is not necessary for the universe to operate. Okay. But my reply to that, is that there is an ethical world that we live in that is ultimately a leap of faith. You operate every time that you make a decision in your human life, you are placing a value, and those values spring from somewhere. Now, the problem with the agnostics is they're living in a
What do
Judeo.
you mean by placing a value? What do you mean by that?
Well, if you choose to marry a person,
Okay.
you're choosing that person over all other persons. If you are choosing to give to a charity or devote your attention to helping a child, for example,
Right.
or you are every choice, everything that
Every
you
time you
make,
prioritize, you're saying this is more important than something else.
exactly,
Okay.
and that comes from basically. Now, you could just surrender that and say, well, that's the culture, but the culture is infused with Judeo-Christian ethics. So you're following the Judeo-Christian ethics without supporting it, but you're following it anyway, right? Almost blindly. The faith exists somewhere. So where is that right and wrong and that good and evil being determined? And if you
Well, I don't know
don't,
if that's a recognition of faith, or that's a recognition of I need to survive, and this is the best way I can reach my objectives. I could disagree with the system and still try to swim within that system. So I'll push back on you and say someone can very easily say, look, everything about this system I think is ludicrous, but that doesn't mean that I'm not living in a ludicrous world. And in this ludicrous world, if I say this, if I do this, if I take these steps, I will ultimately be happier than if I don't. So they're prioritizing not because they believe in the system, but because they believe that will benefit them more than not following that path. Is that not possible as well?
That's a good question. I don't know. You pose. This is why I'm really happy we're having this discussion, because see, and this is another thing. And my friend Derek, who passed away 18 years ago, was one of the most beautiful people I've ever met. And he said, the people that you love, we talked about, I think we were talking about religion or politics or something. And I was like, well, you shouldn't talk religion or politics with your friends. And he said, oh, no, that's exactly what you need to talk to your friends about, because that's the most important thing. And I love you as a brother. And those are important issues, because if you don't talk about it, where are you getting your religion and your politics from? But from some media source, right? So these kind of conversations about faith and love and family and politics, those are exactly the kind of conversations you should have with people that are close to you. And it's so sadly lacking, and our culture is starved for it.
Yeah, and I think that's why people. That's one of the key reasons why I resonated with people from the get-go, is because you can't find these conversations anywhere where people are like talking, not even about even removing religion per se from the conversation, but just even understanding how we think and what motivates us versus what, and why people do what they do is something that is, to me, it's the most interesting conversations you can have, because you it helps you understand yourself. When you understand other people, you understand yourself so much better. And to me, it helps me find my inner peace. I think that the more intelligent you are, the harder it is to be happy, because it's so easy to find things to be miserable about. And the more intelligent you are, the more difficult it is to avoid coming across them and seeing the futility of our existence or whatever. And you sort of need to find some sort of basis to be happy. And to me, I sometimes will, like, after I do something, I'll look back and I'll ask myself, why did I do that? Like, what made me, what was going through my brain when I said this?
Intelligence is a double-edged sword, because it's a gift from God. We're really kind of born with it. And you either are intelligent or you're not, right?
Yeah.
And the people that are very intelligent oftentimes can reason their way around questions that may pose that most people, so they can justify
But that's
amorality.
justifying to the public. That's not internally. They know that it's
But they lie to themselves,
and
and you
that's
can
the
reason. Yes,
that's the inner conflict I was talking about earlier. When there's the
right.
hypocrisy, when you know that you're giving an answer that other people are swallowing, but internally you know that's not a good answer.
Right.
So that's why.
But nobody calls you on it because you're smarter than them,
right?
And you can work your way around, so you aren't challenged, and so you feel smug, and your ego gets rewarded, and your rational brain is stroked in its brilliance. But
Right.
meanwhile, you've actually betrayed your own inner chest function, which is your own morality.
And it makes you
Right.
feel like a certain sense of misery.
Yeah, and I actually address that in Prepare. There's actually a chapter. Well, there's a paragraph or two on this question about intelligence, because to me, I mean, I don't value. I mean, I value intelligence is great, and our smartest people we should support, and we should put them in positions where they can do the most good. That's all wonderful, but intelligence does not equal morality.
That's
It-
yeah. That was my thought when you were saying that. I was like, a lot of intelligent people who I despise because I think they're terrible.
and there's a lot of people that are not so bad, but they work hard.
Oh my
And
God.
they work hard. They're dependable. They're honest. And I'd much rather be around those people. Much rather than somebody who's a lying, cheating son of a bitch who wants to stab me in the back at the first try. You're right.
I'd tell you something. I ever since I was a little kid, my parents always had on Friday, because when you're cooking and cleaning for Shabbos, so you're doing that usually on Friday. There's a lot to get done in the house, and it's very stressful, in particular on the mother of the home. My mother told me that something she learned from her mother was that she would always have, even though they never had much money. My parents were both teachers living on fixed incomes. They counted every penny. But the one extravagance that she afforded herself is that she would have every Friday she would have a woman come in to help her clean up the house and take care of stuff. And usually they were immigrants who were poorly educated. And every Friday it would usually be the same woman for like 4 or 5, 6 years, and then she would go on to do something else, and we'd find some other woman to take that role. And I remember there was one woman. They usually were not very educated, not very intelligent. And there was one woman who she was taking her hour for lunch or whatever. And she sat there, and I don't even think she was Christian. I don't remember if she was what faith she was. She sat there fervently, praying to, I don't even know, Baal. Okay. Seriously, reading her scripture and praying to whatever, I don't know, the magic pink unicorn in the sky. And I sat and I watched her for 3 minutes, and I was humiliated. I was like, this woman who's praying to some empty nothing has such fervent belief and recognition, and she's praying with more intensity than I pray when I'm talking to actual God. And the reason I bring this up in this context is because it's not a matter of intelligence. It's not a matter of anything, but the respect I was able to draw for her and look at her with such deep and utter respect, just because of her conduct and the way she held herself and the way that she did what she was doing. That is what we tend to draw far more respect for and admiration for, and look to emulate and draw inspiration from, than someone who's simply blessed by God by having a higher amount of brain power. So,
well, it's interesting. There's 2 points, and one is that it's interesting that people that think that they can transcend God and the Judeo-Christian faiths often devolve into paganism. What you see people going to Stonehenge and putting on antlers and celebrating the equinox, right? The second thing I see upon the horizon is here, and he's a brilliant Christian theologian, I will say. He's always in my chats, and he makes great points. And one of the things, and I posited this to one of my agnostic friends, and he's struggling with faith, as we all struggle with faith in different ways, right? And he's agnostic. That's where he is at this moment. And we were talking about, it's like, okay, well, posit this as a mind game, because you're very rational.
mm-hmm.
I said, what if you are 100% correct, but that your placement of faith into the rational brain and into a lack of faith and a lack of belief in God will only last for one generation and will ultimately result in tyranny. Is an unsustainable faith of agnosticism? How does that reflect on your faith? And this is kind of, like I said, my revelation in prepare, that writing these 2 chapters on faith is that faith is foundational to freedom.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think that there is something, like, because I think communism was an attempt to eliminate God and to put morality within a rational framework, and it devolved into absolute and utter hell and tyranny on earth. And that is the ultimate result of a denial of faith by the masses. Is an empowerment of the state. You're substituting God with something else. In this case, it would be the state or some human creation that's it's not a worthy vessel for your faith.
Yeah, and that's where we started at. Where basically you're ultimately going to be serving someone that you're going to be treating like God, and it could be the state. I mean, that's then in communism, it is the state, where it's like you're supposed to dedicate your life, your body, and your being to the state. Which, if you think about it, there's no such thing.
The state is just a mob in an organized force creation.
It's not. There's literally no such thing as a state. Like that's just like a term we made up for people who we put in charge. I mean, it's like an organized mob, right? It's a system of different governance, and it's just like, okay, this is just like what we created in order to try and help ultimately benefit ourselves, as we put these people who are going to help make decisions on things. And it's become, even in America to a degree, it's become like this thing that Americans tend to spit on while at the same time revere. It's a fascinating relationship that the individual has with the state here in our country, because if you think about it, we all look at our political leaders as if they're corrupt or stupid or some kind of, or some sort of evil, but basically a litany of terrible and self-interested. Basically, we recognize that our politicians stink, and yet we look at the state as being this amazing thing. And yet
I get frustrated with my conservative brethren, because on the one hand, because I'm in the public defender's office, right? And on the one hand, they're like, we distrust the state, we want limited government, but then it becomes like, prosecutors are always right, and we've got to empower prosecutors more and eliminate crime and more power, and let defense attorneys are liars because they're defending the criminals. And it's this crazy kind of like, we want maximum power in these weapons of the state against the people, but yet we want limited government. I mean, it's always been a strange dichotomy to me.
It is. It is very, especially now for people who are sitting on the right. It's very backward. You're roughly my age, I assume. I was born
55 now. 50.
Okay, so you're a couple years old. I'm 52. I was born in 1970.
So 67. Cheers.
Salute. So you're old enough to remember that, like, in the 80s, we believed in this state, like that America was every positive virtue you can name. It was justice and charity and truth, and the truth, justice, the American way, and Superman with Christopher Reeve coming out there and saving America, and Rocky fighting against Drago from Russia, and everyone from Russia is evil and everyone from America is good, and we love our children and they hate their children, and everything about us was pure. There was just real purity and the state. Anything that sometimes America might make mistakes, but they were really made in good faith, and our leaders were well intentioned and looking out for a healthy, stronger, better America. And now we're at a place in time where it's like, I've done like a 180 on this. Like, I look back on history and I'm like, I don't trust Vietnam was done properly, and that was like that, and even things that I accepted in my youth as like, yeah, of course the Vietnam War was justified and the Korean War was justified. I look back and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know.
We got to make a distinction, and that is between the founding ideals and principles of the United States from the United States federal government.
Yes.
the government is different from the ideals. And this is a big confusion that people have. And they say, well, you don't believe in this country if you don't support the federal government. Well, the federal government is simply the creation or the institutions, right, that have built themselves around our documents. But that is not the founding principles, right? I mean, obviously, the tyranny that's been visited on the January 6th protesters is not in the spirit of the founding documents, right? This has been a weaponization of our federal government against the people, and that is a different thing. So, you know, people
it's a schism. It's a schism between founding principles and practice.
Right. Right, absolutely. And this is another point that I make in Prepare, which is kind of an easy point, and that is that conservatives are right when they're defending institutions that are worthy of defending. But if we're defending institutions that are corrupt and evil, then we are in the wrong. Yeah. So this is where we have to make those distinctions. Ultimately, I don't know. It's just, I'm just talking. I will say I wanted to talk a little bit more about you, Joe. And I mean, we can go, obviously we'll have to do this again, but I want to, because I mean, we could talk faith. I love talking faith with you, but I do want to move into different areas because I don't know how much time you have, but one of the things we started out as a little elementary school boy going to yeshiva.
Yes. Yes. So then,
okay, so circling back to that.
Where
did you go for? Do we do the high school, the college, this sort of thing? Go give us a little more, Joe.
So I was a bit of a rebel in my high school was very, 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 very small.
And this was where?
This was in Forest Hills in Flushing. Like a stone's throw away from where they used to have the US Open. So like literally like 8 blocks from where they used to have the US Open. So so I went to a yeshiva high school, and which we call Masifta. And then when I finished, and when I was in high school, I was always like a really great wide receiver. I was like a really good football player, but like you have to realize my class had 8 kids in it. So
now, was this because you went to a private Jewish yeshiva?
Not all yeshivas are that small. That one happened to be a particularly smaller one, and my brother had gone there. My parents were happy with how he turned out, so they basically sent me there, and I always figured I was just going to go there. And they're
not believing that you're a Jewish athlete, by the way, in the chat.
Oh, I'm telling you right now, I could run like a deer, and I had the softest hands you can imagine. I was uncoverable. I really was.
You were a receiver?
Yeah, I was a wide receiver. When I went, I went to post-graduation, just to give you an idea. So postgraduate, so I spent a year studying in yeshiva during the day and going to night school for college. And I was in Queens College for a year. The way we work it is my class was stupidly smart. Like even though we invested very little time in secular studies, the mean score in my class of 8, so it's not like it's like, you know, but was I got a 1330 on the SATs. Wow. And I was like,
that's very good. Better than I did.
I was like 4th in my class as far as like overall score.
I screwed up high school so bad. So I was not. I'm proud of you because you had a good upbringing. I was
4th out of 8. Okay, like the lowest in my class was like a 1210 or something like that. We were just like they were just stupidly smart, and it was all about like how can we entertain ourselves, and the way we entertain ourselves was by trying to get the other ones in trouble. Like we didn't really get along very well.
I'm going to stop you for a second because I had a question I've been thinking about all day, and it's really politically incorrect.
Do it,
but you know we're amongst friends here, right? It's just you and me talking, and that was why are Jewish people so smart? And that's sort of a strange question. And I was thinking about this, and I was like, I think a lot of it has to do with the strong family structures, the discipline, and the emphasis on education. I don't think there's not a genetic component. I think
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if there's a genetic component or not. The only reason I think there might be a genetic component is because Jordan Peterson claimed that there was. He said that.
Well, but no, I'm just listening to your background.
Yeah.
And and then your outcome. You had this 1350 on your SAT or
1330. Yeah. In my high school, I'll give you to
and then you're
bolster
in the
your
middle
point.
of the pack. But you're being raised in a very strict, disciplined, structured environment with families that loves you, that gives you the structure, and that values education. Those are the qualities that create intelligence. And I think that's the qualities. Go ahead. What do you say?
I'll tell you this much. In my class, no, everyone had had both their parents living at home.
But that's a traditional Orthodox Jewish.
Right. What I'm saying is,
right?
in my school, I was unaware of anyone whose parents were divorced. That was like unheard of for anyone to be divorced, and abuse was unheard of. Drug use was unheard of. In my school,
isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, I'm not complaining.
I mean,
I'm not complaining.
These are traditional values,
right?
And it's and we're talking about it like, oh, it's this lost thing. But this is the model by which we should model our parenting skills towards, right?
Yeah. 100%. And my point is, this is an interesting thing that I only just thought of right now as you were making that point. I told you we pray 3 times a day, and the essence of that prayer is a section which we call Shmona Esrei, which translates into 18, and it's really because there's a section there where we talk silently to God, and there's 18. Like this, and it really actually was amended, of course, to 19. But it's called Shmona Esrei for it, which means 18. There's 18 requests we make of God, where we ask for intellect, we ask for health, we ask for prosperity, we ask for God to listen to our ultimate salvation. We ask for a whole bunch of different things, and the last thing we ask for. The last request, and after we conclude our request, we finish with a blessing to God. Like thank you, God, who gives health. Thank you, God, who gives whatever. So fine. The last one is a request for peace, and it's a question which I heard being asked is, shouldn't that be really the first thing? Like, without peace, how can you have anything? And the answer to that is relevant to the conversation that you and I are having right now. And the answer was this: that peace is not like a thing. It's an environment. It's a state of being. It's not like you get a gift of peace rained down on you. You either have peace or you don't. And that state, that environment is just that's the waters that you're swimming in. And by being raised in families, so you can talk about IQ, and if there's a difference in IQ, I don't know, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But I will tell you this: the advantage to having that peace, that inner peace, and the lack of turmoil in our lives, where you have parents who are continually fighting with each other, where you have drug use, where you have, by the way, another thing it was unheard of was we didn't, one of the restrictive rules is that boys and girls are not allowed to touch each other. There is no such thing as premarital sex. So there's no teenagers getting pregnant.
And this is a silly question, but are you married?
Yeah, I have 6 kids.
The 6 children. Okay, God bless you.
Yeah. I thought.
And I mean, but these values that you can gift to your children, isn't that the greatest gift that you can give them?
I mean, I guess.
To me,
it's sort of like, yeah, of course they would have that.
Of course, you say, of course it is, but this is the things that have been lost,
right? And
that we need to reclaim as a society, because you say it's obvious because you were raised that way, right?
Right.
But see, my father, I was raised as a single mother, right? Now, she did great, and I'm really proud of my mom. She just came back. That's why I didn't eat, because she was here, talking my ear off, and we were having a great time. Yeah. But not having that father turmoil with my father and difficulties with my father, mostly in middle school.
It's going to mess you up. It's going to mess you up. It's going to make your life more difficult. Whatever it is,
more difficult. What happened was, it's
much harder to be studying in school or to concentrate on this, because you're emotionally all like a knot. or you come home and you're like ducking from like, the plates being thrown or trying
Well,
to
it's
hide
not. It
yourself
was just a
away.
matter of like when you're going to school and you're learning about this stuff, it pales in importance to
Yes.
the problems that are happening at home. It's
Yeah.
like this stuff is this is not important.
Right.
This
I
is
don't care about
important,
the
and this is
atomic weight of
messed up, and I got to fix
oxygen.
it.
I don't care about the atomic weight of oxygen. I'm worried about whether my mom is going to get beaten up by my dad. It's like, who cares about who cares about that? So yeah, I totally, and that's exactly my point. When
Yes.
you have
When you
inner
have
peace,
stability
you have
and a
stability. That's stability
foundation
everywhere.
family,
Yeah,
you know you're loved, then
and
you can
you don't
concentrate on.
you don't even need to be pushed to study. You don't need to. You'll just absorb it. When I absorbed most of my teaching, my learnings, I absorbed it in class. Or like I'd be home, I'd be bored and look for something to read. I'm tired of watching TV, and there would just be like history books. So I just sit there, just like, oh, okay, let's see how what was going on during the Reformation period, and all of a sudden, like I just start gleaning things because I'm not sitting there trying to sort out, that my sister is crying because she's dealing with some boyfriend who knocked her up or something like that. It's a stability that I never really thought about this, but that whole state of peace that we pray for is something that we sort of like I took for granted in my childhood that probably is so uncommon for most
Well,
viewers
this is one of
who
the things
watch
that
us.
I loved about my wife, because my wife's from the Philippines and she comes from a very traditional Catholic family. And she's the youngest of 7 sisters, and her mom and dad, and they're very traditional. And when she came here, it's easy to get blinded by the wealth and the flash of America.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, don't abandon the values that you come from, because that's one of the things that really attracted me to her, was the fact that she has these family values, this tradition, this love, and the support of the family, and that is what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and so I said, don't just throw everything away because you get blinded by the wealth and the flash of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully she did not. And she brought me faith, and I'm so blessed for that.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. So you went to college at Queens College, and then
for a year, and then I went to Israel for a year. And in Israel is where I learned just how good I was at football, because I'm not joking.
Crushing your other
yeah. Basically, so then I went to a school where now there was like 200 kids who were like all my age, and when they had tryouts for football, and I dominated in tryouts where I was like easily the best receiver in my year, and so I made the squad. And we would play like against other schools, and there was nothing official. It was like literally we would call someone up and be like, hey, does your school want to play 2 Fridays from now? And they'd be like, sure. Like, and we'd set up, a date and time and meet at Gun Soccer and go play tackle football with no padding, no nothing. Just go out there trying to kill each other. And in that environment, against where they were putting out like the best from those schools, I was like the best receiver my year.
How tall are you? Can I ask?
I'm not crazy, so I'm just under 6 feet.
But you're fast.
I had a natural running ability, which I was very fast, and I had great hands. And I don't know, I was really good at it. So like in games which would be like real defensive struggles, like every game we wouldn't count like extra points, stuff like that. It's like you score a touchdown, that's 1 point, that's it. So like in games that would finish like 2-1 or 3-2, and during the course of 8 games, scoring 8 touchdowns, where like the next highest scorer on my team scored twice, and we never, and it's like, yeah, it's like when I came back from Israel, like in Jewish circles, and like people would like be pointing at me in the street, like, yeah, that's they call me Yosef. It's like that's the guy. That's the guy. Like,
did you play college football?
I wished I could have, but they play that on Shabbos. So I was like, I totally would have loved to have played college football.
Okay, right.
But yeah, they played on Shabbos. So I knew I would never have a career.
Directly to law school after college?
No. Well, no. So what happened was, I came back after a year in Israel, went back to yeshiva, and there I went to in Washington Heights is a place called Breuer's, which is like this is a community of German Jews live there. And so I went there for like 3 years, and I went to Baruch College at night, got my undergrad, and then I decided I'm going to go work. and I saw this advertisement for if you're good at art and can speak Hebrew. And I walk in, and I was like, yeah, I can do that. So I walk into this place, and they were selling monuments. So, and I was just like, I started laughing. Like you walk into a showroom of like headstones from like a cemetery. And I'd never seen anything like that. And they were like, "Can you draw a monument? This is how you draw it. Can you do that?" And they made me like a assistant manager. It was a family-owned business. And they made me like an assistant manager and and sales rep or whatever. I need zero sales while I was there. And I'm working there 6 months and getting paid salary plus commission, which was zero. And this family-owned business that had been this guy's family for like 3 generations, over 70 years. He only had daughters, so he decided he was going to sell it. So he sold someone. The new guy coming in there said, "Yeah, so we're going to move you exclusively to sales and put you on commission, but you can make so much more money this way." And I was like, not so much, not so much. So I said, and I realized the cutoff in New York was you had to work for 20 weeks in order to be eligible for unemployment. And I was at 20 and a half weeks when they fired me. And you get 6 months of unemployment. And I was like, this is amazing. So I went back to yeshiva, and I basically said, you know what? I always thought about going to law school. Why don't I see if I can get in? And that's what I did. I took the LSAT.
How'd you do on the LSAT?
So I was disappointed in the LSAT because my practices I was getting over 170, and I was like, I was hoping I get into NYU or Columbia. I choked on the LSAT. Like, they have the Lawgic games,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, so that's where like Ortho
I want
Jewish
to know your
students,
score because you blew me away with the SAT, and I want to outdo you on something.
Ortho Jewish students traditionally rock that game section, because that's like the sort of Talmud stuff that we spend like 5 hours a day studying. So I was like, it's always like you have to just get the catch, and as to like what the trick is, and when you figure out what that trick is, you get 6 questions in a row that boom, 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 you're gonna get them all right. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like looking at, and you're supposed to spend 8.5 minutes on each of those 4 sections, and I'm 6 minutes in on the first one. I was like, I don't get it. How are we supposed to know this? There's no way. All right, go to the next one. I come to the next one, and I worked through that one. I come to the third one, and I had no idea what the heck I was even reading. And I was freaking out. Like I started just like sweating, because I was like, this is my area here. I don't trust my reading comprehension or my.
Actually, I'm the opposite. I crushed. I think I made a perfect score on the reading comprehension.
Oh yeah.
And on the paragraph things, I did pretty good. And the equations I was good at them, but I really that was my weakest. So I was like, that was my line. So you're the opposite of me.
Yeah. Well, I ended up getting a 164. And
I beat you by 1 point.
Nice.
Sucker.
Well done. Yeah.
I did a 165.
I almost broke down crying when I got my score. I was just like,
I was so pleased. That was 97th percentile, man.
Yeah.
Come on, I listen to you. High standards for you.
Well, anyway.
I'm just happy you made 1 point less than me. That's all that matters. 1 point, baby.
Really? You don't want to talk Roscoe on the bar, because I'm sure I crushed you there. So on the Roscoe on the bar on the multi-state, I basically found the zone, and I was just like, I practically submitted.
Yeah, I crushed the bar too. I mean, the bar exam was easy.
What was your raw score on what was your score on the bar?
I don't even know. I forget at this point. It's like I forget. I don't remember. But
I got 193 out of those 200 questions right.
I just remember it was
the goal is like 165. Like they
said, I was so far beyond. It was like and the thing is, people were always asking like, what was the? I don't even remember what the numbers were, but they were like always looking at like, what do you need to make it? I'm like, what does it take to smoke it? Right? I mean, that was like I was hitting nice. For the smoke.
Nice.
And I got pretty close. I was doing pretty good, but
awesome. Yeah. So anyway, I didn't get into NYU or Columbia. Couldn't get into. I tried applying to Georgetown also. Didn't get into there. And I got into. I was offered a quarter scholarship in Brooklyn or to go to Fordham. So and then the way Fordham worked it was I was accepted to Fordham with no scholarship. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to Brooklyn if I can go to Fordham. But they actually had a thing where they say you can come at night. And then during the summer, you catch up on the 2 course on civil procedure and con law. And you can, and I was like, so if I switch and then switch today for like second year, so you don't have to take 4 years, you finish in the same 3 years. And I was like, so if I go at night, I'm going against people who are busy working and I'm not. So they're like all tied up. And they're also the people who are like a little bit dumber because the ones who couldn't get into day, like the second tier were accepted for night. So I was like, why wouldn't I sign up for night rather than day and have like a weaker competition? So that's what I did. I said, can I switch to night? And they're like, really? Okay. And I was like, yeah. So they switched to night, and I was doing really well. I did really well in my midterms. And then sure enough, in April in 1996, my first year of law school, is when I met. Actually, today is my anniversary, the day I met my wife.
Oh, congratulations. Well,
yeah,
wonderful.
meeting your wife 5
years?
5 weeks before your first year finals.
So how many? Well, see, I have a similar story. See, I met my wife just before I went to law school, and there's a long and a short version, but part of the longer version that we take out is the fact that we basically we didn't really talk. We lost touch for our first year and a half because law school was so hard. But it was not, and she was like, it's not right. You've got to go to law school. Once I found that I knew I was going to do well and I was going to graduate and everything was okay, then we got back in touch. But that first year of law school is really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's all that matters. Second and third year don't matter at all. The only thing that matters
if you get through the first year, you've got to. I was top of my class in the first year. It's like once you get through that, you're going to make it. It's all just basically checking the boxes at that point.
Yeah. So I came out of my contracts final on May 8th, and
how many years, by the way? Happy anniversary on you.
So I was 96. So what are we in now? I got married that August.
So you got married immediately. That was quick.
The way we date is we'll date for like weeks and then have a very short engagement, because you have to realize what I tell you earlier, we don't touch each other.
Well, actually, my wife and I only really saw each other face to face less than 60 days before we got married.
Really?
We met in the Philippines. I was only there for like a week, and then we lost touch, and then I went back. We reconnected. I went back for a week, and we knew it immediately when I got, because it's like, was this just a summer fling, right? Or was it something? And once it was like, yes, this is right. And then she came here, and we got married within 30 days. So we had only seen each other face to face really for about 60 days before we got married.
See, that's by most standards very, very quick.
Right. Yes. The thing, if it's right, it's right.
Yeah.
And all the dance people. I think people are not honest in relationships and in dating. I think a key thing is bare your soul, because but there's so much gamesmanship in this weird dating world, and I fear for my child going into the dating world today.
I don't blame you.
Well, now you have a traditional society, a Jewish. I mean, your kids are all Jewish, right? So there is this structure that provides a safety net for dating.
Right. That's true. Our dating world today is very different than it was when I was dating, and it's very heavily tilted in the sense that all our dating is set up on blind dates, and where basically there's someone called a shadchan, which is the go-between between the and it'll be like the girl's mother and the guy's mother, and will basically handle their dating life for them, and they look into the individual and their family. So I am constantly
Megan Fox and Megan Fox Investigates.
Yeah.
She's got the same thing. She wants to go back to arranged marriages.
Well, ultimately, once they date, it's up to them whether then the choice is left exclusively to them. Like to both the guy and the girl, they have to both want it. In my circles, Hasidic circles are a little bit different, where they'll like just be like, "This is the person you're marrying."
What is the difference between Hasidic and Orthodox?
So, I was analogizing this yesterday when I was watching a video on stream, where the best analogy I've seen is like Catholics to Protestants. So we all are, Hasidic Jews. Most the ones who stay true to Hasidism are all Orthodox Jews. They have certain things. So there are different Hasidic sects. So much like there are different Catholic sects, so there are different Hasidic sects, and each sect is identified by the head rabbi of that sect, and they will all look to that head rabbi as being the binding authority on any issues of Jewish law or direction as far as like how to handle situations and things of that nature. And they'll literally call him for any question. They'll call him to get a blessing before they do a business deal. Like that's a common thing. Mm-hmm. So as opposed to non-Hasidic sects, like with your basic Orthodox Jewry, which there's different types of that as well. Mm-hmm. But we will have a rabbi, but it's not like a family dynasty type of thing. We also don't have the way they become noticeable. Hasidic are more noticeable because they refuse to change the style of dress throughout the ages, because they're looking to isolate that much further from a non-Jewish world.
It's almost a separatist thing. I know we have
insulation through separation. Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's sort of like the Amish. The Amish mm-hmm. is very much a separatist type. Like we have these traditions and we aren't you. I know that mm-hmm. we have an Orthodox group here in town.
Chabad.
Right, they're very out. They have a lot of community
Chabad.
Outreach.
Yeah.
What is it called?
Chabad, spelled Chabad. That's one of the Hasidic sects. It's the best known Hasidic sect.
Are you sure about that? It was
Lubavitch.
That's it.
Yeah, Lubavitch is Chabad. That's the same thing.
Okay, it's the same thing.
Lubavitch will set up what's called a Chabad house. So Lubavitch basically are very into Jewish outreach to anyone who is has like any Jewish blood in them. Practically, they're a little bit of a controversial sect for a few reasons, which not really relevant to the conversation.
Is that with you say it's controversial within the Jewish community?
Yeah, controversial within the Jewish community.
And I would imagine that's because there is a bit of an outreach.
No.
Why is it then?
So we have. Remember, I mentioned there's 13 principal core beliefs,
right? Mm-hmm.
So one of those is that the Messiah will come, mm-hmm. Is destined to return, and so the question when we discuss who is the Messiah, like who is that? Like, which is it a person who? So there's actually an argument that's brought down in Talmud whether the Messiah is going to come from someone living or someone who's already deceased or thought to be deceased and whatever, but someone living or dead. And we never would identify and say this person is the Messiah. And what the Lubavitch sect did, the last rabbi that they had was Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, and what they did was there was a lot of public proclamations by his disciples that he was the Messiah. And that traditionally has led to a lot of Jews basically abandoning that. It's happened throughout history. Meaning there have been incidents like this throughout Jewish history. In the 17th century, there was a person named Shabtai Tzvi. There was also Frankists. So you had these rabbis who, most of their lives seemed to be like your typical rabbi. And then it seems as if they got like somewhat power hungry or had some sort of issue. And their followers basically ended up almost like abandoning Jewish tradition and faith altogether as they followed this rabbi off into doing something that was completely foreign to Judaism. So, and one of those foreign things would be to start basically identifying this person is the Messiah. That's considered like a really taboo thing to do. So because of a lot of his followers to this day, even after his death. So how do I explain this? So in the Talmud, the discussion that comes up in the Talmud is when there's a question, who's the Messiah? So I think the answer that's given there is, if it's coming from someone who's living, it's my Rebbe, like my rabbi. And if it's from someone who's not living, it's going to be Elijah. because we recognize that people from earlier generations were far greater in every respect possible to us. No, that's true.
It's so
It's foundational to
no,
us.
but it's so insider. It's so like Jewish insider. It's fascinating, but it's so arguments between the faithful, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating because you ever see the movie The Life of Brian?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a great
I
movie.
love that. It's
Great
like
movie.
the section, the follow the gourd, and there's a
Yes,
break.
the shoe. It's the shoe.
The
Yeah,
shoe, no,
yeah.
the gourd.
Yes, exactly. I actually showed that
It's
scene
fascinating the way
to my audience like a week or two ago and got hit with a copyright strike. So,
no, but I love it because well, and I actually I'm not quite as interested as well, and if you feel like
no, it's fine.
there's a
I'll,
field to be plowed here, go ahead, but actually one of the questions that I
no,
wanted to ask you about,
there's no plow even.
there's plowing
There's no
going
plow. There's
on.
no field. There's no
There's no
nothing.
field, there's some
It's
plow, a
I'm
little bit
just
of
some old
plowing,
man. I'm
a
just some
little
old man
hoeing.
rambling in his own room to a camera.
Well, one of the questions is and we talked about, because you're an Orthodox, and you've got the and I have a friend who's from South Florida who's a lawyer who calls me occasionally, and he's like, Gosney, I got this question, and he's an Orthodox Jew, and he's always asking me, like, Florida criminal law questions, right? Because he's a Florida criminal lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And he respects me, and he's a conservative kind of guy. And I asked him this, and so I'm going to ask it to you.
Okay.
Because I was like, why is it that Jewish people generally vote very strongly Democrat and left wing?
Oh yeah.
And he says it's because it's like the more faithful, the more Orthodox are very conservative, but the less faithful, the more Reformed church, which are basically agnostics who are born Jews but are basically agnostics,
Chinos,
then become just like agnostic people who become faith gets misplaced and it becomes idolatrous, and it just becomes a similar secular type person.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Definitely.
Definitely. Okay. Definitely. Yeah. That's interesting.
Definitely.
Expound on that division a little bit, because that's interesting to me.
So what I think is that if you have everything that is, I think that it starts with the, I think it's they found their way to hell through good intentions. That I think that's the best way. That's the best way to phrase it. I think that they genuinely believe in the nonsense, and they think that this is being like good and caring and considerate. And
what do you say?
And I think that,
what is this?
I'm talking about. Oh, what is this?
Yeah, you said they believe this is.
They believe that their leftist ideologies are considerate. They're kind. They're merciful.
But of course,
looking
we're always
out.
going to paint ourselves as that. But
I think they genuinely. I think most of them not all of them. Not all of them. Some of them are evil, power-hungry people, no different from Jew or Gentile. The ones at the top are, not. But you're asking why such large numbers of them do it. Large numbers of them are not leadership. So the leaders, whether when you talk about Soros, I think Soros is an evil a-hole.
Well, he was actually a Nazi collaborator.
Yeah, he was a terrible human being. Terrible. Yeah,
I mean, it's unbelievable that guy is. How did he ever get such success and power in?
He stole most of it from other Jews during his collaboration.
Well, that's a whole diversion. But yeah, it's just fascinating that the more Orthodox, the more conservative.
Because you have a void. Here's what I'm trying to say. When you have abandoned God, when you've rejected God, which is what most of them have done. If you've rejected God, you feel empty, especially if you have financial success. You feel as if you don't earn it, and you feel a certain level of guilt. So you want to try and take care of others and feel like I'm doing a good thing. So I'm I'm balancing the scales because I have all these different good fortune. And now I'm going to balance those karmic scales by looking out for others, whether those others are black people or trans or gay or whatever it is. But I'm going to basically try and look out for others. And that way I'm being a good person. I'm one of the good ones. This is how how I think they rationalize, and I think they think they're doing a good thing, not recognizing how terrible they are to the very people that they're purporting to help.
Well,
Because
I want to take a little off ramp because I want to come back to this, but there's a little off ramp, a question I have on this.
do it.
And this is a question I have as a legitimate question. And that is as Christian, one of the things that I find that is fundamental, I think it's the original sin, and that we are born with guilt. And of course, as Jewish people know, there's a lot of guilt, right? A lot of guilt plated. But I find that Christianity has an answer to that guilt, and but does Judaism have an answer to guilt?
We don't start with that. Your whole born in original sin, that was a Christian novelty.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, we don't believe that we're born in sin.
Testament Genesis stuff and the fall from grace.
Yeah, that's not something I did. Same way you didn't. You're white, but you're not responsible for slavery.
Well, but I'm human, and I'm. It's a parable for the fall of man and the awakening of consciousness and biting from the tree of knowledge, and therefore the awareness of death and the awareness of our mortality and the awareness of evil and the knowledge of evil, and the solution to that is
right. So
salvation.
you think that we're going to have a religious conversation here?
No, I love it. Thank you very much.
So your teachings tell you that, I assume it was an apple is what because we actually learned fig tree, by the way, just in case
what?
That it was a fig tree, not that the forbidden fruit was a fig tree.
I don't think it
doesn't really matter. It's not really important. It's an interesting little distinction. But so you think that taught knowledge of death as opposed to introducing death to the world. But there was death. Even if he didn't eat from it, there would be death. He just wouldn't know about it.
Right. Well, see, I don't believe in a literal translation, and this may separate me from a lot of fundamentalists, I would say, in that I don't believe that I believe in evolution, and I believe the world is 13.7 billion years old, and certain processes, right? That so I don't think that the religious text is a text of science. It is a text of an expression of faith, and it is a parable and explanation. It's hyper true. It's true across humanity. And so when I read the Adam and Eve story, I read it as symbolic of humanity's descent from the animal into awakening to the knowledge of mortality and death. And so we become aware of our mortality. We become aware of our nakedness. It's eating from the tree of knowledge. And that's fundamental in all humanity.
That's a really interesting thing. Because, and here's where I'm confused by what you just said. Maybe you can explain to me how your perspective would explain this. What is original sin then?
Well, original sin is that knowledge, that awakening to good and evil. We were not,
is there an action that was a sin that led to that?
Well, I don't think it was a literal action. I think it's an awakening of human consciousness, but it is part of humanity.
So learning about the existence of something that's already there,
right,
according to you, is sinful?
Well, no, it creates sin. For example, you have a lion, and a lion kills a zebra, right? And the zebra suffers, right? But the lion is not conscious. It's not good and evil. It's nature. We project good and evil into the world by our consciousness, right? Animals don't exist in a good and evil. Animals, or a volcano explodes. Is that evil? I mean, you see, it's nature. It's not. It's a morally neutral action. It's only
when we talk about sin today, we usually are talking about someone doing something that's forbidden. Ergo, right. You've now committed a sin. You've done something wrong.
Right.
So, when you're talking about original sin, is there an action that is a doing of something wrong?
Are you talking about an act like there was a literal action 10,000 years ago or
Or
whatever?
whenever, yeah.
No, I don't think it was a literal action. I think it's a symbol. I think it is a myth, not in a false myth, but in a hyper true myth that wherein humanity awakened to morality and the existence of a morality, existence of God, existence of good and evil.
But they're implying there's something wrong with having that awakening.
No, I don't think it, well, wrong. Why is that?
Well, you're calling it
wrong?
original sin that man has to be punished and needs salvation for. If you need salvation for it, that's implying that there's some wrong that was committed.
Well, it's a progression. We went from a conscious imperfection to an unconscious imperfection to a conscious imperfection. So it's an evolution of the state of nature. So when you're unconsciously imperfect, does that mean that you're unaware of your imperfection and therefore happy? Right? But then you become conscious of your imperfection, you are fallen and you're unhappy and you're wounded. And then your quest is to become healed, to become consciously perfect, right? Is to bring that, to heal that inner imperfection. And and guilt would be part of that. Guilt would be that wound, that imperfection that you seek to heal. And I think Christianity is that healing balm. If that makes sense. In my view, and I'm no great.
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to understand.
Sure.
The philosophy. So.
And look, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for Catholics or anybody else. I'm speaking just the way I see the way my faith, and I've come to my faith. Right. I don't think that you need to believe in literalism to believe in, to have faith.
But I always thought that action of Adam and Eve eating from the tree, that was, to some degree, there has to be literalism in order for there to be an original sin.
Well, I don't believe there was a literal Adam and Eve, and there was a literal tree, and there was a literal fruit, and somebody. I don't believe that's what happened. I think it is a representation of man's fall from the state of nature, and a growth from an unconscious imperfection where we become aware of death and evil and morality. And this is a story, because how do we communicate that to each other? It's a perfect story.
I understand that an allegory is an easy way to convey a concept. I understand that. And I always assumed that there was some sort of, that original sin implied that there was some sort of sinful action taken rather than knowledge of the state of the universe, and now creating a need to fix that state that God put us in.
No, I don't think it was an act. I think it is an arising of consciousness that makes us aware. It's an eating of the fruit of knowledge, the tree of knowledge. And what is that knowledge? The knowledge is of, what is the knowledge that we gain that separates us from the animals? It's the knowledge of morality. It's the knowledge of our death and our coming death, right?
Right.
These are knowledge things that all of a sudden we become aware. We become aware of our nakedness.
Well, I'll tell you that. I mean, my take on it is vastly different. Where, look, whether there was evolution or not, I don't know. Like, as far as like how God created the world, I do know that when what's described in Genesis is obviously not like a how-to book. And I think it's designed to share an understanding of primordial type of creation, meaning that if you think about it, right? So first you have light and dark, right? And that's the first 6 days of creation. So you have light and dark, and 3 days after that is when you have formation of planetary bodies and stars and suns and things of that nature. When you have like second day is splitting of waters into like heaven and earth, and 5 days later, 3 days after that is when you have animals that live in the water, the fish, and animals that reside primarily in the sky and being birds. Like that's when they're created. And on the third day, when you have like the birth of trees and production on earth, and 3 days after that is when you have animals basically coming after that. And when I'm using the term 3 days, that's because that's the way it's described. That's the terminology that's used in Genesis. If this actually happened over the course of millions or billions or whatever period of time, I don't know, because how even measuring time before a sun is created on day 4? So what was measuring time on day 3? I can't answer that question, and I don't purport to. But when I'm talking about like the story of Adam and Eve, I do believe that there was a first man who we all descend from ultimately, and a first woman who we all descend from. And I think that science actually indicates it makes sense to say that we all descend from the same pair of humans. And as far as that incident with the tree, I can't explain the whole snake thing and talking snakes and stuff like that. I don't know what, I wasn't there, and it's not my place to figure that out. But I do believe, from a metaphysical sense, from an ethereal sense, that if God orchestrates all this, and originally he could have set the world up without there being death, and that ultimately once man introduces sin through free choice, that what happens is that now, for a person to actually find his ultimate destination with God and have a prayer of getting there, you need death. Death is an important part, because otherwise, because to try and live as a productive, healthy human being for 3,000, 5,000 years without becoming a destructive individual would be an impossible task for man. So in that sense, that the man having a limited time on earth gives him an imperative and a drive to accomplish during his limited number of days here. And it also gives him a chance to succeed without actually becoming a terrible human being by living for a lengthy period of time. Then when in the book of Genesis, when they describe the length of years that people lived, that basically that God recognized during the antediluvian period, when man became so infused with his own narcissistic needs, that God was like, it's not healthy for man to live for hundreds of years, and that basically shorten the period of time that we live here. But without the introduction of sin, in theory, that such a thing would not be necessary. So, and that's how. And now, now I sometimes will make reference to people with your evolutionary whatever. I don't know how that it goes back to the question as to like, how did God create the world? I don't know. I mean, I believe he did it. I think it. And I also question people who say that there is no God. I have a better understanding people who question whether religion A, B, C, D, E got it right. That viewpoint makes more sense to me than people who question the existence of God altogether, because I can't see him, or was he a man in the sky? I'll make a joke like that. And the reason that I question that is because if you look at the intricacy of the way the ecosystems all work with each other, and like the finest clock imaginable. I mean, from the smallest of bacteria.
This is a Thomas Aquinas argument that you're making.
I'm saying from the smallest,
existence of God,
from the smallest of bacteria that's able
right.
to live and reproduce to the largest of whales, and everything being able to work, in concert with each other without naturally destroying each other. That if you think that could just arise naturally, to me, the chances of something like that happening seem to be like quintillion to 1. And if you ask me, like, the chances like there's a God, it's a lot less than 1 in quintillion.
And again, I got to brush up on you're challenging my theological knowledge, but this is a Thomas Aquinas argument for the existence of God. Yes. Well, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not a fundamentalist at all. And I know that I have a lot of friends who are, and I respect them for that. I will say that I think that it hurts, because I think that a lot of the agnostics view Christians and people of faith as being fundamentally irrational. Mm-hmm. And when it runs up against the science of evolution, mm-hmm. and the science of the age of the universe, and then they discount theology based on that error. So I am not of a fundamentalist belief in that the world is 10,000 years old. But again, my friends, all of my close friends, the values that they have are what make me them. They're my friends, not because they agree with my rational brain.
Right.
Right. And we can have great discussions, rational discussions, because we have a fundamental basis of belief in truth, and we're seeking the truth. And we also have an understanding of truth and right and wrong and God. And that allows us to communicate. Whereas somebody who just thinks they're right and wants everybody to agree with them, that's just a petty tyrant who serves their own ego.
Yeah. And likely doesn't really believe what they're spewing themselves.
Right. They're just seeking to make their own rational brain God.
To solve their inner conflict.
Right. I'm really looking forward. I hope I just sent you a book, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
And so I hope you read it and you can comment on it. It's Prepare. We haven't done like any grifting this entire stream.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, you go ahead. You're my guest.
I'm no. The point here is you bring me in because maybe a few people heard of me that don't really know you, so now they can get to know you. So
well, I'm real. This has been such a. I mean, I'll tell you, I am blessed by your honesty, your faith, your truth.
This was fun.
What you bring, I mean, I'm humbled and I'm blessed by you. So thank you very much
kind.
on this
really
Good Friday. What's that on this Palm Sunday for us? And
yes.
You are
Passover coming up on Wednesday night.
Yeah, I'm gonna get you. I get you just before you go blank on the web. I mean, it's just like this thing. And I don't know. I mean, we got to do this again because I only got you. I didn't even get you through law school yet.
Yeah, this is before I had any kids.
Before you had kids.
Yeah.
It's
10 months after marriage. 10 months after marriage is when I had my first kid.
And it's your anniversary. I feel like now.
No, it's not an anniversary. It's the anniversary. I was even having debate with my wife yesterday. I was like, are you sure it's April 2nd? And she's like, yes, I'm positive it was April 2nd. It was my parent. That was when we had our first date. So.
Okay, well,
see,
you're a good man to remember that stuff, man.
I only remember it because she told me this yesterday. So I was like,
"What's that?"
So I remembered it was like a couple days before Passover in 1996, and I was like, what day was that? And she's like, you never remember. It's April 2nd, and this is what she told me just yesterday. So I was like, oh, okay, so.
Well, it's going on 2 hours. We probably ought to shut it down. We got more to talk about. I got so many more questions. I got so many things I could talk to you about. But let's cut it off at about 2 hour mark here.
All right.
So that way we'll better to leave them wanting more, right?
Yeah, always best to leave them wanting more. Yeah.
But it's been great, and so please do. The book is Prepare. It's only available at SteveGosney.com.
Is there a link? Is there a link below?
Right. See right there.
No, is it in the description?
No, it's not. I haven't done it yet, but I'll get to it. I'm not very good. I'm bad at this stuff, No
one's going to start typing in SteveGosney.com. You have to have, because they won't. They won't. You have to make it as easy as possible so that even the laziest person.
Well, Rose is in the chat. She's my Rose is going to do it. Well,
not everyone looks at the chat. You need to just put in.
I'll add it later.
Okay.
Come on.
By the time you're watching this at home,
watch this at home. But it's a real. I would like to, actually. You know what? When you get it, if you do read it, we'll do this again. Maybe do it on your channel.
Cool. Yeah. No, I'd love to have you on.
And we'll talk about it and see, and you can give me all your criticisms and your praise.
I'm sure nothing but praise, the finest of praise.
Well, I don't mind criticism. And the thing is, when we this is the beautiful thing about talking with somebody like you, is that if you believe in honesty, you believe in truth, there's no ad hominem attacks. No, we believe in truth. We're seeking the truth together. Yeah. We respect each other, and it makes for a beautiful discussion, wouldn't you say?
Amen. More and more. This should be the norm. This should be something that you don't even have to say, because it's like, of course, why would it be anything else?
Right.
So that's the way it should be.
Well, God bless you, Joe, and give my best to your wife and your family, and
Take care, brother.
A beautiful Passover. I don't know what's the right blessing for Passover.
People say Chag Kosher, but good luck with that. People say Happy Passover.
That has one of those.
Yeah, it
fowl
does.
or
It,
whatever.
it starts with that. Yeah. No,
Yeah. Okay.
happy Passover is fine. That's fine.
Okay.
So
Well,
thank you
well,
so
how about
much.
if I just say God bless you?
Amen. And you too, my friend. You
All
too.
right.
Thank you for having me. I really had a
Thank you,
great time.
Joe. Thank you for
Thank you.
everybody showing up.
Godspeed.
Goodbye.